Most people assume their thoughts belong to them, that everything they hear inside their head is a personal opinion, a personal conclusion, a personal truth. But if you slow down for a moment and listen more carefully, a quiet question begins to surface. Where did these thoughts come from? Why are you so certain about who you are and who you are not? Why do some possibilities never even enter your mind, as if they were never allowed to exist? Why do certain ideas feel unrealistic, irresponsible, or not for you, without you ever consciously deciding that they shouldn't be? Think about the phrases that appear automatically when you consider change. I'm not that kind of person. It's too late. I'm not ready. People will judge me. These lines often arrive with a strange sense of authority, as if they were facts. Yet in many cases they are not facts at all. They are old conclusions, borrowed, repeated, and reinforced until they feel like your own voice. And here's the subtle part. The mind doesn't label thoughts as mine or not mine. It simply plays them over and over. And the ones you hear most often begin to shape your identity. They become the background music of your life. But identity is not something you were born with fully formed. It is something that was shaped by what you were surrounded by what was rewarded, by what was criticized, and by what was feared. Over time, those influences leave traces. They become inner rules, inner limits, inner definitions of what is possible. So the first step is not to fight your thoughts, not to replace them with forced positivity. The first step is simply to notice them and ask a different question, not, is this true, but where did I learn to think this way? Because the moment you ask that question, something changes. You stop being completely inside the thought. You step back and observe it. And when you can observe a thought, it no longer has total power over you. For today, that's enough. Just one quiet pause, one honest question, one small moment of distance between you and the voice in your head. Because once you begin to separate yourself from your thoughts, you begin to return to yourself. Most of the thoughts you carry did not begin with you. They were passed down quietly, long before you had the language or awareness to question them. They arrived through repetition, tone, and example, not as ideas to consider, but as truths to accept. From an early age, you absorbed messages about what was possible and what was not, about what was safe, what was risky, and what was expected. These messages didn't always come as direct instructions. Often they appeared as reactions, a look of disapproval, a warning disguised as care, praise given for obedience rather than curiosity. Over time, these experiences formed a mental framework, a set of assumptions about how life works and where you fit within it. And because these assumptions were learned early, they feel natural. They feel like common sense, but in reality, they are inherited conclusions, not personal discoveries. Many people mistake familiarity for truth. If an idea has been around for long enough, it feels reliable. If everyone around you believed it, it felt unquestionable. And so you didn't choose these thoughts, you adapted to them. The mind is especially impressionable when it is young. It looks to its environment for cues about survival and belonging. To be accepted, it learns quickly what to think, what to avoid, and what not to want too much. These lessons sink deep because they once served a purpose. But what protected you then may be limiting you now. Understanding this is not about blame, it's about clarity. When you realize that many of your beliefs were inherited rather than chosen, a quiet sense of space opens up. Space to reconsider, space to update, space to decide what still belongs in your life and what does not. And this awareness marks an important shift. You begin to see that your inner world is not fixed. It was shaped once. And because it was shaped, it can be reshaped. Some of the strongest thoughts in your mind are not really thoughts at all. They are memories that learned how to speak, voices from the past that never fully left. In childhood, words carry weight. They come from people we depend on, people we trust, people whose approval once meant safety. When a sentence is repeated often enough, it doesn't remain a sentence, it becomes a rule. Don't stand out. Be realistic. That's not for people like us. Better be careful. At the time, these phrases may have been offered as guidance or protection, but the mind does not store them as temporary advice. It stores them as instructions for how the world works. Years later, the original voice fades, but the message remains. It reappears as your own inner commentary, sounding reasonable, mature, and responsible. You no longer hear it as something you were told. You hear it as something you decided. And because it feels like your own conclusion, you rarely question it. These internalized voices are powerful because they feel familiar. They speak with confidence. They often appear just before you consider doing something new, something uncertain, something that could change the direction of your life. They don't shout, they don't threaten, they simply remind you of how things are. But the truth is, these thoughts were shaped by a version of you that was still learning how to survive, not how to expand. They were formed in a time when fitting in mattered more than becoming. Recognizing this does not mean rejecting your past or blaming those who influenced you. It means understanding that some of the rules you live by were written for a different chapter of your life. And once you see that, you gain the freedom to ask a new question. Does this voice still deserve authority over who I am becoming? Society rarely tells you what to think directly. It doesn't need to. Instead, it defines what is normal, what is acceptable, what is considered a successful or respectable life. From an early age, you are shown a narrow range of outcomes that are praised and rewarded. Certain paths are treated as safe and sensible. Others are labeled unrealistic, risky, or irresponsible. Over time, these judgments settle quietly into your thinking. You begin to measure yourself against invisible standards. You compare your progress, your desires, and your decisions to what is expected. And when something inside you wants to move in a different direction, discomfort appears. That discomfort is often mistaken for intuition, but more often, it is the signal that you are stepping outside a familiar script. Society reinforces its rules not through force, but through subtle consequences. Approval when you conform, silence or criticism when you don't. The mind learns quickly what keeps it accepted and what puts it at risk of standing alone. As a result, many thoughts that feel personal are actually social echoes. Ideas about timing, success, worth, and ambition that were absorbed from the environment around you. They guide your choices without ever announcing themselves as external influence. And because these standards are shared by many, they feel objective. They feel like reality itself. But they are not universal truths, they are agreements, stories repeated so often that they begin to feel unquestionable. Once you recognize this, something shifts. You realize that the anxiety you feel before choosing differently is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are touching the edge of a story that was never fully yours. Fear plays a much larger role in shaping your thoughts than it first appears. Not the obvious fear of danger, but the quiet fear of rejection, disapproval, and uncertainty. This kind of fear does not shout, it sounds reasonable. It presents itself as caution, logic, and common sense. It offers thoughts that seem protective. Better not risk it. Better stay where it's familiar. Better not want too much. Because these thoughts feel calm and responsible, they are rarely questioned. We tell ourselves we are being realistic, mature, grounded. But often we are simply obeying fear without realizing it. Fear becomes an editor of your inner dialogue. It rewrites possibilities into limitations. It shortens your vision. It gently steers you away from choices that might challenge the image others have of you, or the image you have learned to protect. And the more often fear speaks without being questioned, the more authority it gains. Over time, its voice blends into your own. You stop noticing where it begins and where you end. What makes fear especially convincing is that it once served a purpose. At some point, it helped you stay safe, accepted, or unnoticed when that was necessary. But protection can easily turn into restriction. Understanding this is not about eliminating fear. It is about recognizing its tone, learning to hear when a thought is motivated by caution rather than truth. When you can hear fear clearly, it no longer gets to make decisions in silence. It becomes one voice among many, not the author of your life, but a signal you can listen to without obeying. Awareness is the moment the automatic pattern begins to break, not because the thought disappears, but because you no longer move with it unconsciously. A thought arises, just as it always has, but instead of following it immediately, you pause. There is no struggle, no argument, no need to replace it. There is simply noticing. This is a thought. In that moment, something subtle but important happens. You are no longer completely inside the thought. You are standing just far enough away to observe it. This small distance creates choice. And choice is where freedom begins. Most people live as if every thought deserves agreement, as if every inner sentence is a reliable description of reality. Awareness interrupts that habit. It allows you to see the thought as something that appears in your mind, not something that defines you. You don't need to judge the thought or push it away. You only need to stop treating it as unquestionable. When you do, its emotional grip begins to loosen. This is the true turning point. Not positive thinking, not force, not control, but awareness, calm, patient, and honest. From here, the old pattern can no longer run automatically. And once the automatic process is interrupted, a new direction becomes possible. As awareness grows, you begin to notice that not all thoughts speak in the same way. Some arrive with pressure, with urgency, with absolute certainty. Others are quieter, more open, less demanding. Borrowed thoughts tend to sound rigid. They speak in rules and conclusions. Always, never. That's just how it is. They leave no space for exploration or change. Their tone is often critical, impatient, or dismissive. Your own voice feels different. It does not rush you. It does not shame you for not knowing. It allows uncertainty and process. It speaks in questions rather than commands. This difference is subtle, but once you become aware of it, it becomes easier to recognize. When a thought sounds like a verdict, there's a good chance it was learned, not chosen. When it sounds curious, patient, and grounded, it is more likely coming from you. Learning to tell these voices apart is not about silencing one and amplifying the other. It is about listening more carefully, about noticing tone, not just content. Over time, this practice changes your relationship with your inner world. You stop being driven by every critical or limiting thought. You begin to respond rather than react. And in that response, you slowly reclaim authorship over your own mind. You don't need to confront every belief in your mind to begin changing your inner world. Transformation rarely comes from force. It comes from curiosity. Instead of arguing with a thought, you begin to ask it questions. Not aggressively, not defensively, just gently. Is this the only way to see this? Who taught me to think like this? What happens if I don't immediately agree? These questions do not demand immediate answers. Their power lies in the pause they create, a pause where the old pattern can no longer continue uninterrupted. When you question a thought, it softens. It loses its absolute tone. It becomes something you can hold, examine, and if necessary, set aside. This is how the inner dialogue begins to change. not through denial, but through permission. Permission to see differently. Permission to try. Permission to not know yet. Over time, the language inside your mind shifts. Harsh statements become observations. Rigid conclusions turn into possibilities. What once felt fixed begins to feel flexible. And with each small shift in language, your relationship with yourself becomes more supportive, more open, more human. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about creating enough space for who you already are to emerge without constant interruption. You did not choose the first thoughts that entered your mind. You did not decide what voices would shape your early understanding of the world. Those thoughts arrived before you had the awareness to question them. But awareness changes the relationship. As you grow more conscious of where your thoughts come from, you begin to realize that not every voice deserves the same authority. Some thoughts were useful ones, but no longer serve who you are becoming. This is where choice quietly enters the picture. Not dramatic choice, not rebellion, just the steady ability to decide which thoughts you continue to believe and which ones you allow to pass without following. You don't need to eliminate fear, doubt, or uncertainty. You only need to stop letting them speak for you. When you choose to relate to your thoughts with awareness rather than obedience, something important happens. You stop living as a collection of inherited ideas. You begin living as a conscious participant in your own life. Freedom does not arrive all at once. It unfolds gradually through attention, honesty, and patience. And perhaps that is the most important realization of all. Not every thought in your head is yours, but you get to choose which ones shape your future.